Okay, happy Friday. Today we're going to finish chapter 4. You have an exam that'll be posted, uh, available to you at 4 p.m. today on chapters 1 through 4. You'll have all of this afternoon and tonight. You'll have all of Saturday, all of Sunday, and all of Monday due by midnight Monday. Um, so, first, we're going to go over the lecture, and then, if with what time we have left, we're going to review. There are 56 questions on this first exam. No time limit, as always. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. We last left off on discussing what happens. Uh, there's a correlation between the time spent in an orphanage and intelligence or IQ performance. So we know that we have sensitive periods. Uh, these are age ranges, particular times in our lives where we are especially sensitive to experience. Um, so experience expectant, right? This occurs early and naturally. Rapidly developing organization, meaning this goes where and this part of the brain is responsible for this, that communicates to that. So it's setting it up for us to interpret things and perceive things accurately, recall things, store things accurately. These depend on ordinary experiences that are expected by the brain for normal growth. So you would think of like language. Experience dependent brain growth. This occurs throughout our lives. This is where we have growth and refinement, and this results from specific individual learning experiences. So you won't learn the quadratic equation, right, unless you are exposed to it, right? The brain is organized to learn language, right? So that's experience expectant. The brain is expecting uh, to pick up on these skills. Dependent is, just everyday experiences that make you who you are, that make you know what you know. So changing states of arousal, there's the sleep wake pattern that gradually shifts to a night day schedule, and the total sleep eventually declines. Total amount of sleep, like I said, it was like in the beginning, as babies, newborns, we only wake up to feed, and then gradually we'll actually wake up and stay awake to interact. So these changes are influenced by our brain developing, cultural beliefs and practices, uh, parents' need for a schedule, increased melatonin release, and attachment to the caregiver. All these things, all of these things are influenced, or I should say, are influencing our sleep wake cycle. Differences in sleeping arrangements. The parent infant co sleeping is the norm for 90% of the world's population. The cultural values of interdependence versus independence will influence our sleeping arrangements. So, in Western cultures like ours, we're independent and individualistic. So, we're more likely to put a baby in a crib. The possible benefits of co sleeping: it helps the infant sleep, breastfeeding is more convenient, and it may protect the babies at risk for SIDS when co-sleeping is done correctly. Some influences on early growth, of course, our genes, our nutrition, breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. Breastfeeding we know is the gold standard because it has um, not just the, the the immune benefits, the immune system benefits, but also we're getting the best nutrition, we're getting the best protein, we're getting the best fat, we're getting the best sugar. There are risks of overfeeding, and basically, so our brain, a part of our brain, regulates our caloric intake. The hypothalamus is constantly tasting the blood, right? And we know this when it comes to hormones and things. And it regulates, thirst. It regulates hunger. It regulates sex orientation, sex drive. You name it. The basics of survival. And by overfeeding a newborn, uh, and an infant through the first year of life, it sets the hypothalamus to think, oh, this is how much I'm supposed to take in. So it's this whole, it's called a set point theory, that it raises the set point higher because it will adapt. This is why when people, as adults, when they try to diet after gaining a bunch of weight, their set point has risen. So the brain's like, no, no, no. Even though you're taking in less, I'm going to store more. I'm going to take what you are giving me and continue to store it. And of course, there are malnutrition concerns as well. So heredity, a large influence on the rate of physical growth when diet and health are adequate. It affects our height, our weight. There's something called catch-up growth. Um, so basically, when you go through some bad experience, uh, like for example, children now who are in like severe automobile accidents or some sort of physical damage, the body, instead of promoting physical growth, it'll take its energy and um, and redirect it towards healing. And so children who are in automobile accidents or severe physical, you know, uh, uh, they experience severe physical trauma of some kind, they lose height. They're on average an inch or two shorter. But early on, we can have what's called catch-up growth. So let's say you are not fed adequately. Let's say you are going through some physical ailment. You have uh, um, leukemia or something like that. There will be some catch-up if it's early on. Again, this speaks to the whole plasticity of the brain as well, right? Nutrition and breastfeeding. It's crucial for the first for development for the first 2 years. The benefits of breastfeeding ensures nutritional completeness, provides the correct fat protein balance, ensures healthy physical growth, protects against disease, protects against faulty jaw and tooth development, ensures digestibility, and then it leads to a smoother transition to solid foods. Mothers in developing world are often aware of the benefits, so as a result, they're using low-grade commercial formulas and ingredients. So how do we prevent overweight children? We breastfeed exclusively for the first 6 months. We avoid giving foods that are rich in sugar, salt, and saturated fats. It's not that sugar's bad. It's just that you don't want to get too much. Everything in moderation, right? Um, and then, of course, children provide opportunities for energetic play. Limit TV viewing because if they're watching TV, unless it's one of those, Wii board things that you can, what is that called? A Wii Fit. Then they're active. Malnutrition affects 2.1 million children annually, stunts the growth of 1/3 of all children under the age of 5. Dietary diseases of severely malnourished, marasmus, sorry, during the first year due to inadequate feeding, kwashiorkor after weaning due to low protein diet. So one is you're just starving them. The other one is they aren't receiving enough protein. Um, so um, the which one was it? I can't remember. One of them leads to like the one with the big belly, and then the other one leads to just overall skinny, like just frail. And I'm not going to guess. I forgot which one it was. You can look it up. It's not something you need to know, but those are like the physical outcomes. There damages to the brain and the organs could be long term. It affects learning, behavior, and disrupts physical development. Food insecurity afflicts 19% of children in the US, which again is going to affect physical growth and learning. So, again, this is all about infant and toddlerhood development, touching a little bit on children in general, but um, so development in learning what our preferences are, learning what acquiring fears and emotions. This is all the product of classical conditioning, right? So we pair a neutral stimulus, something that should not cause a response, with one that should, right? So a child, there was a study with this child named Little Albert, and little Albert, they wanted to know if they could condition little Albert to be afraid of rats. And little Albert wasn't even afraid of anything. Um, he wasn't afraid of fire. I think he was like 2 years old or 1.5 or something. And so every time they put him in this like little room and they let him play with this big little medium sized whatever white rat. And every time little Albert would touch it, they'd hit this gong and make a loud noise, which would startle him. Eventually, he began to associate that startling noise with the rat. And so just the mere presence of the rat would cause little Albert fear, is the idea. So classical conditioning will help the infant recognize which events usually occur together. In this case, it would be the loud gong and the rat. And the environment becomes more orderly and predictable. So we'll associate comfort, let's say, with and we'll just say comfort with our mothers, with our caregivers. Could be our fathers, could be our mothers. So here we have an example of classical conditioning. Here's a baby breastfeeding, and the unconditioned stimulus thing that should cause a response, which is the sucking. So the unconditioned stimulus, which is the breast milk, is going to cause the response of sucking to continue to suck. Well, the mother is going to then pair the stroking of the forehead with the breast milk, with the breastfeeding, right? And so now, just after so many repetitions of that, so many exposures and associations, eventually just rubbing the head will cause the baby to uh, suck. Operant conditioning is, think of it as like operating. Know that you are operating a machine. There are consequences to this lever or that pedal or that wheel. So it's all about consequences, right? So the infant acts or operates on the environment. If it's reinforcing, if the consequence is reinforcing, they repeat it. If it's punishing, they don't. It's that simple, right? So if the kid touches, you know, I don't know, a hot stove or something that's too hot or something, ow, right? They're not going to touch it again. And then they're talking about positive versus negative. Positives are gaining something they want, negatives are losing something they don't want. It's still reinforcing. Positive punishment, gaining something they don't want, negative punishment, removing something they do. Habituation, to become habituated, the gradual reduction in the strength of a response due to the repetitive stimulation. So, what does this mean? It means that if the mother was stroking the forehead of the baby while breastfeeding, and the baby associated that stroking motion, feeling, sensation with feeding, and then if the mother just started doing it without feeding, eventually the baby would not respond. The baby would not suck because it's not being paired with the unconditioned stimulus any longer. So it'll extinguish. Um, but there is something called spontaneous recovery, where if she does it again, just once, pairs the stroking with the breastfeeding, the baby will then return to just suckling or sucking to the stroking of the forehead. And we'll use this paradigm, this whatever, to study an infant's perception and cognition. Imitation. Infants are born with the primitive abilities to imitate. Mirror neurons, also known as empathy neurons, they fire when we observe someone doing something or when we ourselves are doing something. This is why we'll get sad when someone else is sad, or this is why we'll watch a movie and someone will get like smacked across the face and we'll kind of jerk like that because we're like, oh, but we're not getting smacked in the face. This is, we're imitating, we're sensing. So the reason why it's called empathy neurons or nicknamed empathy neurons is because it allows us to put ourselves in another's shoes without experiencing it directly.
I have a question.
Yep.
Okay, so I heard, isn't there a thing where they can test if you're a sociopath or something like that if someone else yawns and you don't? Like you don't have like
Yeah. Yawning is due to mirror neurons. Um, like yawning as in like when you see someone else yawn.
yeah, you see someone else yawn and then how you yawn normally, but if someone doesn't do that, it's like a sign that they're like a sociopath because they're not able to empathize with others. I thought I heard something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Could be
it
bigger.
does make sense, but you know, I
Like it's not like a the end all be all, but it's like one of the factors.
I think it's a good start. I haven't heard that. I think it's a clever way. That's why I think psychology is so cool because we can find clever ways to answer questions.
Hmm.
But then I have some reservation about it. Like I'm thinking like, yeah, but physical movements and actions versus emotions,
Uh-huh.
I feel like they would be organized differently.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. It does make sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I heard some people at work talking about it. So I was just like,
Where do you
well,
work?
at the hospital. I heard some nurses talking about it. That's why I asked you. I wanted to pick your brain about it.
I haven't heard about it. I would say it's a good start. I would say that I would have some reservation about just assuming that someone is a sociopath based on their, absence of yawning when someone else yawns. I would say
Yeah.
it might be one of those like signs versus symptoms. In this case, it might be a sign of,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good question. Good,
Oh,
really
thank
good
you.
question. You clearly understand what we're talking about, obviously. So that's good. Good sign.
Thank you.
Okay, so our ability to imitate expands greatly over the first 2 years. This is a powerful means of learning and exploring our social world. Imitation does so much for us, not just in our like physical abilities or our thinking abilities, but also in how we identify ourselves. Motor development. New achievements build on previous ones. So if you just think about walking, right? Walking starts with rolling, then sitting up, and then standing, and then cruising, and then walking. They all build on top of each other, right? So fine motor development, reaching, right? So we know about that whole fencing post, the whole fencing, pose. Um, so again, it's moving from one step to the next. Eventually, we'll learn about the ulnar grasp versus the pincher, right? So we motor skills at 3 months, 3 weeks. They can grasp a cube, but not pinch a cube. It's different. They can sit up alone at 7 months. They can crawl at seven. These are the average. These are the averages. 8 months they can pull to stand, play patty cake at just under 10 months. Just under a year they'll walk alone. They'll scribble at 14. They'll jump in place at over almost 2 years of age. People say, "Oh, my baby," that my baby's, you know, 15 months or whatever. Just say it's a year. Just my baby's 19 months. Just say it's almost two. But I get it. I get it. Motor skills as dynamic systems. Let's see. Yes. Okay. So the acquisition of increasingly complex systems of action, like crawling. So these are more complex. They involve multiple muscles working in concert. Um, so each new skill is a joint product of the central nervous system developing, the body's movement capacities, like our muscle control, our muscle strength, the goals that they have, the interests, and then lastly, the environmental supports for the skill. Um, we're going to learn a little bit. Yeah, here, right? So it says the environmental supports for the skill. So let's say something as simple as walking, right? In different cultures, they practice different ways of taking care of their children, right? So down at the bottom it says the examples. Rural China, sandbag rearing is where they would put their children in sandbags to keep them in place while they go work in the fields. Well, by doing that, it delays the time that they master walking. Uh, the Kipsigis of Kenya, they have a lot of exercise, a lot of movements, so they have earlier walking achievements. So the rates and patterns of development are affected by early movement opportunities, environmental stimulation, and of course the child rearing practices. Milestones of reaching and grasping. The newborn is pre-reaching, so just kind of reaching out. Okay, 3 to 4 months in ulnar grasp is when they're taking something and they're not holding it like this. They're holding it like, bad example, kind of like this. Like they're not using the tips, they're using like just the palm. That's an ulnar grasp. And then by 4 to 5 months, they'll be able to ulnar, and then lastly the pincer. Developments in hearing, 4 to 7 months, sense of musical phrasing, 6 to 7 months, distinguish musical tunes based on variations in rhythmic patterns. 6 to 8 months, they can screen out sounds that are not used in native languages, meaning they can, if someone's speaking on top of the sound of someone playing the piano, they can tune in to someone speaking. They can screen out non-meaningful sounds that are not related to language. 6 to 12 months, they can detect sound regularities in human speech. 7 to 9, they begin to divide speech stream into word-like units. They're babbling and pausing like someone would be speaking. Now, okay. So we know that when a baby is first born, it has a range of about 8 inches that it can see. After that, it's gone. There's nothing there. But at 2 months, they can begin to focus, like really focus on aspects of objects. 4 months, full color vision. 6 months um, is focus means attention. 6 months is acuity, where now they can actually see the finer details, and they can track objects. 6 to 7 months, depth perception, and they'll use things like okay, so there are different kinds of depth perceptive cues. There's what are called binocular cues, which requires two eyes, and it's called retinal disparity. So we camera one, camera two, like camera one, camera two, camera one, camera two, and if you focus on an object with a background, you'll see that the thing in behind it is moving when you open one eye and close the other one. You'll see that the actual image moves, and it partially covers the thing behind it. That's that's a cue to us that when it moves between the two eyes, that the thing that's moving in front of it is it closer to us. That's called retinal disparity. But then we have what are the obvious things. Yeah, there you go, Patrick. You see how the things are moving though? Right? So our brain picks up on, oh, the thing in front seems to be covering it with this eye, but not so much with that eye. This eye, but not that eye. So that tells us it's in front. The other thing are called monocular depth cues or pictorial depth cues. And these are just simply, you can tell when something's closer or farther based on what you see in a picture. Um, Relative size. You see a person standing next to a tree, you know that this person is smaller than the tree because the tree is larger. Or if they show a tree and then a person and they're the same size, then you know the tree is behind the person because you know the rule of the tree. The tree is larger than the person. So for like a 6 to 7 month old, they will become accustomed to an object. Let's say it's a play set of plastic keys, those are colored keys. They know the size. They played with them, right? But if they're over there, they're gonna be smaller in their visual field. So they know because it's smaller, it's farther away. That's a pictorial depth cue. There's other things too, like texture gradient. The farther things get away, the more smoother they appear. Like if you look at your fabric, far away, it looks like a smooth, fabric. But then if you look really close, you can see like the stitching and all that. All right. Okay, so binocular depth we just covered. Pictorial depth. Pictorial depth means you only need one eye. Okay. Don't worry about that. Okay, so in this example, what they're showing you is that if you look here, you can see that they have what's called the glass cliff. This is actually a glass tabletop, but they put these checkers here, this checkered pattern, and then they continue the checkered pattern, but larger. And the baby recognizes that there's a cliff here and it won't cross. But say a whatever month old, they reach it by a certain age. Let me see, hold on. Would be 6 to 7 months, because they'd have to be walk or crawling. So say, you know, a 4 month old is going to walk right onto that glass. What they do is they put the baby on this side here. Why is this number? There we go. Put the baby on the side that it's on. And then they have the mother stand on the other side, say, come here, come here. And if the baby just walks onto the glass, the baby doesn't have depth perception yet. But at about 6 to 7 months, it'll go, I don't think so. I'm going to fall. And a lot of that is experience dependent. Pattern features. I don't care about that. I thought this was interesting that I'll show you. So when you show this, a bold checkerboard, um, to an infant in the first few weeks of life, this is what it sees because it hasn't mastered the details yet. It doesn't have the lines that it can draw yet in its mind. Okay, and if you see a complex checkerboard, then they just blend them all together. I mean, you can learn all these things. Basically, what they're showing us is that there are certain developments at certain ages. Again, when it comes to face perception, um, I don't know. Well, I will say this. I will say this that newborns have face preferences. They have in their first year will have facial preferences. Um, I'm trying to think of something that's important though. Nothing that would be nothing that I see. Sometimes I want to like you guys to know things. So when you're raising kids or you're helping someone else raise a kid or you're babysitting or something, you have an understanding of what they understand. Um, yeah, but this to me is not important for that. Okay, so but this is kind of neat though. As early as 3 months, they prefer and more easily discriminate female faces than males, unless the caregiver is male. If exposed mostly to members of their own race by 3 to 6 months, they show a race bias, an own race bias. Between 6 and 9 months, has more difficulty discriminating other race faces. And this is part of why, when it comes to eyewitness testimony, we're so poor at identifying people of different ethnic backgrounds because we are developing based on what we're exposed to discriminate in a good way, meaning tell the difference, to discriminate between this and that, hot and cold, bright and dark. And but if we're not exposed to the differences in facial features and skin, all that, then we are terrible at discriminating between them. No, no. All right, good enough. Good. All right. So now I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to take attendance and then we're going to review. I don't want the review recorded.